to episode 2 of the Potomac RPG Podcast. Why can't you just tell me the entire history of your world in a 3-minute YouTube clip?
Welcome one and all to the Potomac RPG Podcast, your source for old news, tired conversation, and mediocre advice for all of your favorite tabletop role-playing games. I'm your host and Archmage of the Order of High Sorcery, Adam.
And I'm your deific Allosaurus that preserves ancient civilizations at the center of the world, Matt.
Welcome to the show, Matt. Another mano podcast here. Really looking forward to this. We tried this out with Sarah back in the last season and really kind of liked mixing it up a little bit. And if there's anyone who knows a hell of a lot about any given subject, it's you, Matt. So I'm excited to dive into things. But first, recap of last night. Basically, the end of this arc that we've been on in Avernus. That ended with a hell of a boss battle that took two full sessions to get through. What'd you think about last night?
So, I mean, it was definitely a big fight, and I have to say it was really the combination of Porto, Joran, and Lulu of all creatures that really came through. I mean, giving Joran that magic, the warlock bow, he must have done about, I don't know, 100 points of damage, and Lulu's trumpeting was like another 50 something. I mean, the fact that the boss was hurt more from his arrows than from shots from the ballista.
Yeah, like I think I was a little disappointed by the ballista. Like
I feel like it should do more damage. I feel two things about a ballista. I feel that one, ballista should do more damage. And secondly, so like in like games like Warhammer, like ballista actually, I think it does damage like through ranks. So if you have like 4 ranks of guys, it'll actually do damage like to multiple guys if they're like standing behind each other.
Yeah.
Get like blow through. Like ballista, like it should be. I mean, it takes like 3 freaking actions to shoot the thing, and
if you look at the kind of action economy of things and you think, okay, 3 people, if you do have 3 people, it's basically 3 turns worth of action during that turn. But if you put in what a cantrip might do for one person or a weapon attack with another person, 3d10 I don't think is cutting it at level 6.
Yeah, no, it really, I really think siege weapons should be much more damaging, especially if you're going to make them take 3 turns. I mean, because obviously we didn't have longbows to go around, so there was a good reason to use it anyway. But just for the range. But in terms of damage, I mean, how much damage should a ballista do? It should do a lot.
Should do a lot, yeah. And especially if maybe there was a condition on it too that might boost it up a little bit, but it's just straight up piercing damage, non-magical at that. So when you compare it to my character with a very weak cantrip of Acid Splash can do 2d6. So if I'm in range, of course, but if you put that on 3 different people, well, now you're getting 66 for that same amount,
which is actually slightly better than 3d10.
Yeah. So I agree. Siege weapons need a bit of buff, and not to kind of get off on a wild tangent, but it's something that we discussed before. I love the idea of 3 people, working on something to pop it off. The inclusion of teamwork actions. Yeah, if there ever is a
combo attack.
If there ever is a 6th edition, which there probably won't be in quite some time, but or maybe a 5.5, like I would love to see something where the different classes have kind of teamwork abilities, like things that I sacrifice my turn in order to do this.
I think that's a really cool idea. I mean, without it being too video gamey, obviously, Chrono Trigger, you had all those cool double attacks
Yeah.
and triple attacks there. But theoretically, yeah, like you could do, and you could make them kind of more generic. I mean, you could make, attacks that feed into attacks, hold maneuvers that give it, kind of like the aid of, kind of like expanding the help ability.
Yes.
In a way, sort of, it's not just, all right, yeah, you give the guy advantage. That's kind of boring but useful. But things that maybe do a little more, that let conditions pop in or something like that. So
Exactly.
I think that's a neat idea.
Yeah, I mean, and if you think, certain classes working together, what that might kind of result in. So, if you got a cleric and a fighter, together, like within range, and that quote unquote like enhanced help action, what does that do? Like, what does it, what could it create? There's a lot of possibilities there. And
now your attacks do radiant damage.
Yeah, or whatever, like something beyond like, I buff you. Like, it's something that benefits both by doing something that normally you wouldn't do. So maybe if a wizard comes up to front line and is within 5 feet of a fighter, they can do this kind of combo thing that does more damage.
Pathfinder had, and it was complicated, but Pathfinder had teamwork feats. The problem was, in order for it to work, both characters had to have the feat, or there was a special class abilities where you effectively could use it even if your companions didn't.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of them, and some of them, they were generally more powerful than regular feats, but some of them were fairly conditional. But there were some that, like, it increases the mage's concentration check or caster level, or there were ones that allowed additional attacks of opportunity, or things like that. There were actually quite a few of them, and I think it's a cool idea. The problem with 5e is that obviously feats are rare and expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of think that maybe some of it should just be built in kind of automatically.
Yeah, I agree. I don't even think it should be a feat. I think it should just be part of regular gameplay. Like, you see, I wouldn't say you see it. Obviously, we don't see wizards and barbarians running around, but like, it should be kind of a common sense thing that two players or more can work together on things. Like, I like and I don't know if this happened old school much, where enemies in particular would take multi-turn in order to do some devastating effect.
Oh, not really. I mean, especially in old school 2nd edition, like, the rules are not that advanced, really. Okay. So there weren't. I'm trying to think of any cases where there were. The most I can think of is where, like, there was a random chance of something happening each round or something, and then finally you roll the die and something really bad happens.
Yeah, well, that's another thing that I'd love to see is, okay, like, these kind of charge up abilities that hey, I'm sacrificing something and exposing myself in order to do something massively better. But anyway, we are getting way off on a tangent here, and I apologize. The battle last night was amazing, despite my hatred of dodge mechanics when it comes to spell effects. I don't understand how someone sitting behind a shield wall of sorts can't block these.
Well, I think
needles?
The problem there is that the needles are
a
constitution effect and not a reflex dexterity save,
which is dumb.
Which is weird. It feels like it should be reflex.
It should be reflex, absolutely. Yeah. Anywho, getting off that. It was a great session last night. Steve did a great job kind of wrapping things up for this arc. Excited to see where our descent leads us next. But let's get into the topic for today. Every week we sit down at the table together, and at some point, you, Matt, you and Steve get talking about some piece of information that came out in some previous edition 20 years ago, and how that set up this and that and this. And I always have the same thought: how do these bastards know so damn much about this world? And that got me thinking further about lore and world building, and how to get that information to stick in someone's head so that 20 years from now they remember it. So that's what we're going to be getting into today, the lore dump. Now, Matt, you're no stranger to lore when it comes to multiple TTRPG settings. I mean, hell, I think you could describe the entire historical landscape of Ars Magica. And what is it about lore that gets your motor running so much? Is it just interest in the system you're playing, and by proxy, you're therefore interested in the lore? Or is the lore in some games just that good?
Well, I mean, I think it varies a lot by game, but the important thing for lore is that enough lore. It doesn't even have to be perfect, but like lore that just fits together makes for a living, breathing world, right? So, in the early days of Dungeons and Dragons, you had like Keep on the Borderlands or whatever. Like a lot of the adventures didn't really have that much lore. They were kind of standalone adventures that took place in generic medieval land. And there wasn't much explanation as to, oh, there's a demon here and a demon there. But what happened was, as they kept writing these adventures and certain like characters that kept reappearing, it started to essentially create the world, right? It kind of grew organically, in terms of especially Greyhawk, and there was Roy Arneson's Blackmoor before that and things. But a good lore, or at least passable lore, makes the setting work. It makes it make sense.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's really important. Like it's not dependent on the system. Like there was this game that came out a few years ago, which was it was a PDF, it was a sci-fi game, it was Eclipse Phase. And honestly, the rule mechanics were not that. It was percentile based. I didn't like the rule mechanics that much, but the setting was really cool, and the story behind it. I mean, it was they took a lot of things from other science fiction. It wasn't like totally original, but altogether, like this setting was a pretty neat setting. I was like, yeah, I want to play. And I want to like know what's going on. So it's important. It's not critical. You can have a game without it, especially with new players. But I feel like it really adds an extra dimension to the game.
Yeah, and that kind of brings up a secondary point of the audience as well. So in our group, we have a mix of grognards and newbies. There's some people in our group who have only played 5e, and some who go all the way back to the very beginning. And yeah, I'll admit, like when we were in Baldur's Gate is such a huge like area. I mean, it's not Waterdeep, but it's huge. And I found myself a little lost at times, just kind of trying to understand the politics and what everything meant. And I actually found some comfort in Avernus, because even though there was still some lore that I wasn't up to speed on, it was kind of contained, if that makes sense. Like, okay, we're in Avernus, so like this makes sense to me, like what's going on, and it's something a little bit newer. Whereas in Baldur's Gate, you're dealing with a lot of the politics of the different dukes and stuff like that. So, like, how do you keep that kind of stuff straight in your head when, especially political intrigue type games?
Yeah, so obviously we haven't run a straight intrigue game. I mean, there was a little bit of that in Baldur's Gate portion of the Avernus arc, but I think that it depends on the player. I mean, not every player likes to keep track of all those minutiae. Things.
I still have an empty notebook,
right? But at the same time, well, the notebook thing didn't really work. But the thing, it's like asking the players to do work, right? But the thing is like it helps a lot. Especially for players who design a character that's not a combat focused character, right? So if you were playing like Decorius is, I mean, he can fight, but that's not his only function, right? I mean, so for him, it's like, oh, well, this is also part of the adventure is playing the factions, and not too long ago. They came out with a Game of Thrones RPG because Game of Thrones is like super popular, right? And so like the world building there is like kind of been done for you, and a lot of people are familiar from the books or the HBO series. So in a case like that, like an entire set of mechanics is devoted to intrigue, right? In addition to combat, right? It's baked into the system. So it's for certain kinds of games and certain kinds of players, it's very important. Now, for some players, it's not. Some players just want to do the dungeon crawl and, kill the goblins, the gobos, or whatever, and take their loot. You don't really need that much world building for that. And that's what a lot of the early D&D adventures were like.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, and we kind of experienced that in that the Monday night game that I'm in with Tom's group compared to our Saturday group. We're much more kind of into the intrigue a bit more in our Saturday group. Monday is kind of your usual hack and slash. Let's find fat loot and go through the dungeon kind of stuff. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there, and also shows how important it is for a DM to know your group and what they like and what they want to do. Because if you try to do some intense intrigue, deep plot kind of stuff with a hack and slash kind of group, that is not going to go over well. I don't care how you do it. So let's get into some questions just to dig a little deeper onto this topic. The first post that we have comes from Reddit user Etchstone, who asks, "What's the best way to explain homebrew worlds? I have a homebrew setting that I've run a handful of times and that I have a lot of information about, but I've been struggling with how to properly convey the lore of the world to my players. What's better, setting up a Google Doc or Session Zero to teach the basic knowledge and history of the world to the players and then letting them explore the rest of it? Or just throwing them in a world completely blind, save for what pertains to their backstories and letting them uncover every little detail?" So what do you think about this, Matt? What's a good way to kind of do that lore dump?
So I think that you have to be careful. I mean, in most campaign settings, I think like a new character should know the basics about the world, right? I mean, it would be weird, if you grew up here and didn't know what America was or Russia was, or obviously, if you're in the Forgotten Realms, you've heard of Cormyr, you've heard of Waterdeep, it would be weird if you didn't. You know who the major gods are. It would be bizarre if you didn't, right? So there's certain things that, you can just flat out tell the players when they start, okay, you're from this country, there's that country, these are the gods, this is major shit that happened in the last few hundred years. Right, you should know that. I mean, maybe there are dumb people that don't know that stuff in real life, but most normal people.
There's some people who don't know who major politicians are.
It's like the old jaywalking on Jay Leno.
Exactly.
But aside from that, in general, assume it's fine to give the players the basics of your homebrew setting and what the major players and major political players, major gods, important things that have happened. Then for more specific stuff, I think it's better to work that, into their backstories and their plots. Maybe there's something particular to this royal family or noble family that the player might know because of X, Y, and Z. And those things are better when you can work them into the, into the story. Because those will be more particular to the character and not general knowledge.
Sure.
So it's just, I understand the problem with a homebrew because obviously if you're using an established setting, some of the players may already be familiar with the setting. You don't necessarily have to explain everything. Whereas if you have a homebrew, you've just made it up yourself, and there's probably all kinds of impossibilities and contradictions that you miss. And some player might pick them apart, right? Homebrew, it's hard to actually design a world. It's not easy.
Especially a fresh homebrew, if in terms of everything is created. I think depending on your group and the DM, but when you're building a world, possibly almost like a tangent world to another that will help explain what's going on. Because if you just whole cloth, new gods, new magic sources, new geography, new political factions, all that stuff, it's tough without some kind of anchor for the players to kind of say, oh, so this is X.
And if you look at a lot of worlds that are big, very often you can see the real world inspiration for it. Like Pathfinder, there's a lot of worlds that are or Warhammer's another one that are hey, this is sort of like certain countries in Europe. Hey, Andorra's kind of like America.
Yeah.
Chalice is like, oh, it's like devil worshipping French, Spanish people. Like Garen's like North Africa. It's not exactly. And Warhammer even more so. Like Warhammer, if you ever seen the Warhammer world, it's basically Europe, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, that's maybe I think it was a little uncreative there. I think they could have been a little more creative in that one. But the point is, it's easier to use sort of a pre-existing template just because it sort of takes into account stuff that would kind of happen given human nature. You would kind of get a kingdom like this, or you would get wars over that. So you don't have to sit there and try to simulate each and every little thing that could have happened to create the world, which is pretty difficult.
Yeah, it is. And I like your idea of basing some information off backstories. So you could almost have a tier setup of sorts. Tier 1 is something every single player will know, and they're just like the basics of your setting. And then look at your players' backstories for what they create and say, okay, because of your backstory, you would know this information. And you can kind of identify those areas that only they would know, and then it's a unique or specialized information to build off of. That way, everyone has a basic understanding, but there's still some information that certain party members can explain to the rest because they know it. I really like that idea of kind of tailoring to the background a little bit. But hopefully that gives you some ideas there, Etchstone. Best of luck in your campaign. Would love to hear how it's going, and let us know.
I have news here.
And the sound of Ralphie, the news goblin, can mean only one thing. It's time for Potomac RPG News. All right, so the big news this past week was that the national treasure and star of screen and stage, Jeff Goldblum, is going to join the actual play podcast Dark Dice. Now, it's no new thing to have celebrities playing D&D, but it just seems to me that someone as big as Jeff Goldblum going on, not a quick TV segment or an appearance on Critical Role, but rather a podcast of all things, is huge. Matt, what's your take here? How likely is it that we're going to get Jeff Goldblum on our show sometime?
So, for one, I think it's awesome. I mean, Jeff Goldblum definitely has the geek credentials to, come on a D&D podcast. I mean, he's the fly for our younger. So, for any of our younger listeners who may not remember, the breakout part for Jeff Goldblum, well before Jurassic Park, was he played a scientist who mixed his DNA with that of a fly and a mutational machine and turned himself into this fly human monster. And it was both funny and terrifying, and that's sort of the role that made him famous. But for those of you who also don't know, he was in the famously camp movie Earth Girls Are
Easy. Yeah, yep, absolutely.
Where he played an alien who came to Earth in search of some poontang. So with Gina Davis was the girl out of there.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
God,
yeah.
I remember
So
Gina Davis.
Jeff Goldblum is definitely a beloved treasure. And I cannot wait to hear what he has to say concerning D&D. And who knows? I mean, it's about getting him on, and we won't know unless we ask, right?
Yeah, well, someone else is going to have to ask, because I am not the type to be like, hey, Jeff, we have this tiny little podcast here. You want to jump on for show, see what happens? No, I'm really excited for this. I honestly hadn't known about Dark Dice before this story comes out, so I'm really looking forward to giving it a listen. And just, he's playing an elven sorcerer. Oh, yes, please, any day of the week. I'm really looking forward to hearing what he can do in this role. And from everything that I've kind of looked up about Dark Dice, it's very professionally done and produced. So it looks like it's going to be pretty cool. I'm really excited for it, and if you are too, we'll put the link in the show notes. But the new season of Dark Dice is going to be called The Long March, and it releases on all major podcast streaming platforms on May 12th.
I just hope at some point he gets the polymorph spell and turns himself into a fly.
Into fly.
That would be pretty awesome.
Oh, it all comes together. Yeah. So everyone, that's May 12th. Check that out on Dark Dice, anywhere you can find podcasts. But we're going to take a step out for a moment. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break. You know, when we were first getting this podcast together, we knew we needed some good music. And we looked into a lot of options that are out there, but we settled on Soundstripe. At Soundstripe.com, they have such a wide variety of high-quality music to choose from. Every song that you hear on this podcast is from Soundstripe, and we couldn't be happier with what they have to offer. And it's not just music. They have a ton of sound effects and video stock footage as well. So if you're making a podcast or videos on YouTube or have some creative project you're working on, check out Soundstripe. They're worth a look. And right now you can use the promo code Potomac RPG, all one word, and get 10% off. That's Potomac RPG, all one word, to get 10% off your purchase. Elevate your work with the finest stock media all in one place at soundstripe.com. And with that, let's get back to the show. All right, let's get into another post. This question comes from Reddit user Swaggy let me try this one. Swagasaurus Rex, who asks, how big should lore dumps be? Hey, y'all, I'm a relatively new DM, and I'm 5 sessions into my first game in my homebrew setting. Basically, I'm really excited about showing off my world, and from what I can tell, some of my players are also into the lore, as 3 of 5 ask questions out of game. My predicament is turning off my lore dump filter whenever a PC makes a history or religion check and rolls a natural 18 through 20. Any tips, fellow DMs? All right, Matt. So about half the group loves the lore. How much of a lore dump do you go with when a PC rolls high like that?
Well, I mean, lore is important, as we kind of talked about in the previous questions, but obviously a big lore dump, like right in the middle of the session, can totally derail the game, unless it makes sense in the story. So an example that did was, for our group, we ended up at Candlekeep, and we were learning all this stuff about, hell and what had happened. And in that case, it made sense, in the story. But if you're just like in the middle of the adventure and someone finds some like medallion with a symbol on it and they roll a 20 on their lore thing and there's like this whole history, right? It's just, you don't want to like sit there and go through like books and books worth of lore as like the players are waiting, in the dungeon for the adventure. So it doesn't mean you don't reward the good roll, right? You have the characters that have the lore, they made the good roll, but they don't need to know the answer necessarily right then and there, right? Mm-hmm. So you can work some of it into the story. If it's something historical, you might even do, Steve, we had with the Helm with Tormund, the vision, which was the flashback.
Yeah, that was
literally
great.
Living history. So for big things, that could be pretty cool. Another thing that you can do is have an object or event, you get the lore, and the character doesn't actually know the answer, but they know where to find the answer, either a place they can go or a person to talk to. So they roll the lore. It's like, oh, here is the ancient artifact of X, and they roll a 20, and it's like, oh, well, I don't know this, but my cousin Sagius at the library of whatever is like an expert on this sort of stuff. And, right. And after the event, you then know where to go. You give them the pointer so that they don't get the answer instantly, but you still reward the good roll and the good skill by giving them the pointer of like where to go next to get the answer, so that you can move it not in the middle of that session, but you can move it to some place that works better.
Yeah, and it's another plot hook, right there, that you've expanded out. So I like that idea a lot, and I would agree that a massive dump in the middle of a session can grind things to a halt. So whatever information you're kind of giving that player for a high roll, it better be just a few sentences worth. Like I think anything more than that, the rest of the party is either going to tune out or it's just going to slow everything down. Like if you're trying to explain the history of this ancient civilization that fell 300 years ago, that's going to be tough to do in one paragraph. So I think the pertinent information, get that out right away. And I love the idea of kind of a separate thing where, we can go here for more information. Or if maybe what they find with that history roll, instead of like a normal investigation or perception, maybe they find a book. And you just need time to research this book, so you have it, and that's what you got with your high roll, but you're still going to need time to kind of get into it. And then the DM can just send that information over to the players to be able to look through in the downtime rather than right then in the middle of a session.
Yeah, it could be like, Elder Scrolls, like in Morrowind, you're going, there's all these books about like the history of the world, like just sitting around.
Yeah.
You can read them on your leisure time. It's not, you're not in the middle of something, you could read it and learn about it, but it's not, you're not, in the middle of the adventure, like suddenly have this whole.
Or you can be like me and just collect them and just never read them. I'm sorry. Like I understand it's a rich world. People love it. And it is great. Boy, I tried playing the game that if I picked up a book, I would read it right then and there. I would read it. And that lasted for about 20 minutes. And I was like, I can't do this anymore, man. It's just too much reading. But yeah, hopefully that helps Swagosaurus Rex with the lore dumps. Keep it short and sweet. If it is more massive, then find a way to either stretch it or give that player an opportunity to review that stuff out of session rather than in the session. But best of luck with your campaign. Sounds pretty cool. But we're going to get out of the lore dump for a little bit and get into a type of lore that's a bit different. I think it's time for a palate cleanser. Welcome to the Palate Cleanser, where we take a break from the serious topic discussions to get into something a little bit lighter. Now, Matt, everyone else on the show has gone through this, but not you. And I think it's about time we get your answers to the DnDTag. You might remember this is a list of questions by Ginny D on YouTube about a person's D&D background. So, Matt, are you ready to dig into your D&D origins?
Absolutely.
All right, let's get into it. There are 15 questions. We might skip the one about natural ones, but we'll see. So, first question for you: what was your first D&D character?
So this might actually surprise people, but my first D&D character is actually quite nameless. There's a nameless magician that I played for a one-shot adventure when I was at summer camp when I was like, I don't know, 14 or something like that. It was just it didn't go anywhere. We had too many people. It was like a camp activity, and I remember that was my first time playing a non-computer based D&D game. Mm-hmm. And I remember I don't even know if I had a name for the character or if it did. It wasn't important. And it only lasted one session, and not much happened because you can't get like 20 people to agree on anything. So
yeah, well, let me ask you this: what's your first D&D character that you knew the name of?
The first D&D character that I knew the name of. Well, let's see. It would have been someone in college because I played a lot of RPGs that weren't D&D in high school, and then I was DMing. So I played. I don't remember the name. That is a Rift's character. That was Rift's character. I think for D&D it would have been. I can't even remember the names of those anymore. Jeez.
Okay, what was the class then?
Oh, fighter. I had a fighter when I was playing college. Yeah, as a fighter.
What edition was that?
That was still second edition.
Still second.
That was right around the time. It was college. It was right around the time I think third was coming out, but we were still playing second.
Gotcha. All right. Well, which D&D class is your least favorite to play, or do you not want to play?
I've never been big on druids. It's not because I think druids are weak. It's not because that druids can actually be quite effective. They're my least favorite to play because every different edition of D&D has had they've always made shape-shifting an important part of Druiding.
Which doesn't make sense to me.
Which is weird because it's like completely ahistorical, right? But I guess it's like a nature thing. And the thing is the shape-shifting rules in every edition have been like weird in some way. Like I don't feel they've ever got those right. Mm-hmm. So it's, in like third edition, it was like you're adding this funny suit on top of what you can already do, or you use the stats of the monster. Like it was so broken. It was either it's been too weak or too strong. Like, and they've never really hit it just right. And it always runs into trouble. It's like, oh, what do I do? Oh, I've got to check the stats, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so I've always felt that it's just been like, oh God, it's like a drag to play. I mean, yeah, it can be real powerful, but it's kind of weird. And it's also kind of weird that they picked like Druids, like they picked this one sort of, Gaelic kind of subset of mysticism religion from back in the pagan mysticism religion to be like a character class. I mean, you can use it for like shamanism in general, but I've always felt like it kind of didn't stick out well, and I felt mechanically that there was sort of a lot of issues with it, and it had a lot of weird rules back in the day, like Druidic is the secret language, but you can't teach it to anyone, or else like all the other druids will like kill you or something. Like,
not only that, it's kind of like and granted, I haven't played many clerics, or many druids, but like, how often are you going to run into something in a campaign where Druidic is used? I mean, at least with Thieves' Cant, most times there's a Thieves Guild somewhere in the city. But
well, the idea is there's like a secret society of Druids, right? And the thing that was really funny is at least in second edition, maybe in third edition too, the Greyhawk, and this was, I think, really the Greyhawk lore, was you could only have one Druid of like 17th level or one Druid of 18th level. It was like Arch Druid or Grand Druid or something. I don't remember the titles. So like in order for you to level up, like the Druid ahead of you had to like die or something.
Oh, geez.
Like it was this really weird thing. I mean, granted, never get to that level, but still, like it was this really like strange lore that they had. So like the Druids I've always felt that the Druids kind of been sort of a weird like kind of thing, just kind of hanging on the side. And it's not because it lacks power. You can actually play a very powerful Druid. It's because it's just, I felt a lot of the mechanics were kind of weird and a lot of the lore was kind of weird. And so I've never really been big on Druids.
I can say that like I had never played a Druid before, but then I played actually on my second Druid now in Tom's campaign. And I will say the UA that's been coming out, the Circle of the Stars Druid, and I'm currently playing a Circle of the Spores, Circle of Spores Druid as a fairy, by the way. So another UA. So I'm a fairy Circle of the Spores Druid. And I think they basically have an option in there instead of shape shifting into a creature. Like for example, Circle of Spores basically gives you like this, cloud or this aura of spores that boost your temp HP and it gives you a bit more damage, almost like an aura.
Is that the one that like poisons everyone around you?
Yeah. Although I don't think it does. Yeah, it poisons. Actually, I think it does necrotic. I can't remember. Anyway, but instead of shape shifting into an animal, you have these other options, and I think that's the right way to go because, like some of the older classes, it's all about the shapeshift, and I agree with you. It just there's some things wrong with it. But anyway, let's move on to the next question. What D&D spell would you most want to have in real life outside of Wish?
Oh, well, outside of Wish. Well, I didn't put Wish because I figured that was a cheesy answer. And I don't want to age 5 years if we're using second edition rules. Yeah. Or it cost me 50,000 XP or something. I would say easily teleport. Oh. That's a pretty good one. I mean, that's, it's a game breaker in the game, and it would be a game breaker in real life. Yeah, if I couldn't pick anything massively powerful, my number 2 choice would be prestidigitation. Sure. I need to brush my teeth. All right, cut my hair. Boom, shower. Boom, done. just like the ultimate convenience spell. You could build a business based on it. You can build a business based on teleport too. Yeah.
And it's cantrip, so you don't even have to rest afterwards.
Right, have to rest. Yeah.
All right. So, what is your favorite D&D monster?
This is a tough one. So I I was gonna put Rust Monster, but I'm afraid if I put Rust Monster, we'll start having Rust Monsters in our campaigns.
Yeah,
and it's not so much. It's my favorite when you're a DM, and least favorite when you're a player. So that's not really a fair one. I'm gonna say Aboleths. I happen to think Aboleths are really freaky, and it's one of the best examples of, and not necessarily extraterrestrial, but an alien creature, right? I mean, the Aboleths are, these, for those D&D players who aren't familiar with them, they're these strange fish-like creatures with multiple eyes, but they're like prehistoric. There's something that predates humanity, and so they're not something necessarily drawn directly from Lovecraft, but they would fit right in. And they were actually the big bads in the Night Below campaign setting, which I've talked about in previous podcasts, and they actually make really terrifying opponents. Partly because they're in the water, partly because of their intelligence, partly because of their mental powers, partly because you're dealing with creatures whose motivations and thought processes are inscrutable to, modern humans and demi-humans. Gotcha. And I think they have a lot of potential as villains and as, hidden masterminds.
That is a good choice for a D&D monster. Well done. All right, let's get into number 5. What's your favorite NPC or villain that you've encountered or created?
So when I was a DM, I had sort of a big bad for a story arc for my players. So this is in the Birthright campaign setting, and this is what's called I'm probably not saying it right. It's a Gaelic pronunciation, Australian. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Blood of Darkness. So basically, it's this guy called Hoarfrost, and in that campaign setting, various characters and players and creatures inherited like the power of the gods when the gods blew themselves up in this big battle. And so it's kind of like Highlander, like you kill them and like you get some of their power, right? So but the ones that got the power of the evil god, it like gives them like these awesome abilities, but it like mutates them into monsters. And so one of them was this dude Hoarfrost, who basically had cold-based powers, and he was like this giant like Yeti-like creature. But they didn't stat him up, so he was mentioned in like the book about the Shilling, but no stats or expansion, just a sort of other ones that are in this area. So I've sort of built up his stats. This is in 2nd edition. And I had this, and basically the players had to fight through this couple of dungeons. Basically, there was this plan to bring cold to like a huge region, and it was like a Fimbulwinter kind of thing. And they ended up confronting him on a ship, like in like cold water, and they were fighting on this ship, and like people were getting like tossed overboard and shit. It was an awesome fight, and that was an epic fight, and my players, like, they were down to like a couple of hit points like the end of that fight. It was a pretty epic fight. It pushed them to pretty much their limit, and Hoarfrost is a pretty straightforward monster. I mean, I didn't spend a lot of time with, he's not super intelligent. I didn't spend a lot of time building up his culture, but just as like a sheer like elemental challenge. Like I thought he was great, and it was really a nice expansion of just something that was just a blurb in a book. I felt that like this is how I'd stat him up, and it worked really well.
Very good, very good. All right. So, has one of your characters ever died, and what killed? Well, we know that one of your characters died.
I think you remember that one. The most recent one, that you remember would be Cornelius.
Cornelius, such a cool design of a character.
And for our listeners, he died from non-elective brain surgery. So basically, we were in this meat grinder saw type dungeon that Anthony had thrown us into at the start of the campaign for no reason other than to torture the characters. And we had this. There was this wall. There were like 2 bosses, and we killed the first one pretty easy. And then we went on, and there was like this wall of flesh that's like a surgeon that makes lobotomized zombies out of people. And it took out like half the party with a fireball, more than half the party. That was like a near TPK. Yeah. And then it was Radamanthus and Cornelius like charged this thing, and we put some serious hurt on this thing. I mean, it was almost done, and then it grappled Cornelius. And meanwhile, like Radamanthus, played by Steve, is just hacking on this thing, and it's almost dead, right? And he's like killing it. And then what happens is it knocks me to 0 hit points, and then it has this, and so it chooses to attack me and kill me, and then lobotomize my character rather than defend itself against Radamanthus, who's chopping it up. So it's a little
source of contention. Yes.
Yeah, I think that Anthony really wanted to kill a player, just to enforce the horror of the setting. But yeah, so Cornelius kind of got his brain surgery, and that was it for my Sling Blade impression, which I was using as his voice. So I missed doing the impression. I had hoped we'd keep a chunk of flesh for my next character to like resurrect him years later, which would have been hilarious. But that campaign sort of suspended. So yeah.
Well, I enjoyed it. Unfortunately, I think that was like the one session that I wasn't there for.
Oh, you weren't there for that.
I wasn't there for the death of Cornelius, and I feel so bad. Anyway, next question. What's your best Nat 20 story? So
I don't really, well, let me rephrase that. I don't have my own Nat 20 story as a player, but I have one as a DM for one of my players. Mm-hmm. So back in high school, I was DMing, and we were doing that same birthright campaign setting. And one of my characters, he was a fighter. I think he was like 7th level or something at that time. He had 3. His attacks, I think, were like 3/2. And he decided that he was just gonna like take a shortcut and like go through this swamp at night by himself. Like the other players didn't want to go. And I was like, because A, I don't want to deal with a split party, and B, it's like a stupid fucking idea. So I tell him that you really want to do this, right? And so he's like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And he's playing, like, his character's like 18, like 80 something strength, which is, it doesn't work in 5e, but it would be like having, like, he had like a plus, he was pretty beefy. I mean, he was a beefy character. And dual wielding, and we were using the optional dual wield rules from one of the Splat books, I don't remember. And he goes to this forest at night, and I'm like, well, yeah, fuck you, a black dragon's gonna attack you because you're just doing it, right? So I'm like, yeah, it's like I gave him like all these warnings. I wasn't trying to be a douche. I gave him a chance to run, right? He doesn't. So he goes and he fights this dragon, and here's the weird thing: in 2nd edition, this is like an adult dragon, not like a great worm or anything. It's like an adult dragon, like middle of the road black dragon. Uh-huh. Here's the weird, which is still pretty threatening.
Yeah.
In 2nd edition, dragons didn't really have all that many hit points. So I think this dragon had maybe like 80 hit points, and it's like a 7th level fighter. He had like almost as many hit points as the dragon did.
Wow.
And so he takes the first round. I don't remember. I think the dragon attack first was a breath weapon. I did okay, survived it. And then he like goes to town on the dragon, and he's got like 18 whatever strength and weapon specialization, and he's hitting. The AC's not like super high, and they weren't that tough in 2nd edition, believe it or not. And he's doing a lot of damage. And then like one of his attacks, he rolls. I think he went to the 2nd round, and then he rolls a 20, and he like crits my dragon.
Oh dear.
And yeah, so I was like gonna teach him a lesson, and then he just like kills my dragon. And I was like, I have failed as a DM. I was like, it was like, yeah, he's like, I'm just gonna like, this is like the players taking like a giant shit on like your campaign roll kind of because it's like, yeah, don't do that. People don't wander through the swamps at night. That's a terrible idea. It's like, I'm gonna wander through the swamp at night. It's like, okay, the characters are gonna derail, and now it's only a matter of time before they start shaking down villages, and there's like no one who can stop them, and and they were those types of players because we are teenagers at this point, and how those games go. So my attempt to enforce discipline failed with a black scaled fist failed miserably.
Oh dear!
And that crit was part of it.
Yeah. Well, we usually skip the best natural one story unless you have one. You have one. All right, hit me.
So this was when I was playing. So it wasn't D&D. I was playing a game. We were playing Robotech, which is by the Palladium system. And of course, it's a terrible. The mechanics are awful, right? But Robotech is awesome, by the way. For those of you who don't know the history of Robotech, it's a fusion of 3 anime from Japan that were put together and redubbed in English, and it works, and it's just awesome. Nice. And so there was an RPG based on it. So you have basically these transformable space fighters that look like F-14s in their fighter form, but they can also turn into like, mech form, which is, awesome. And we were fighting off so Earth was being invaded by these alien giants called the Zentradi, for those of you that are familiar with Robotech or Macross, from which it came. And I'm at the end. I'm playing basically like the Rick Hunter, no, the Max Sterling character. So it's one of the characters from the actual story. And basically, it's like kind of this Star Wars pastiche, and like I'm ready to take the big shot, which is gonna take down like the Zentradi flagship and like stop the Armada, right, and save the Earth.
But this is a natural one story, so this can't go well.
These are all a natural one. I don't remember. I think it was my missiles. I think I like did the classic anime. You launch like 20 micro missiles at once, right? I mean, this is like anime shit out the ass, right? And it was like 20 missiles, and I roll a 1.
Oh no! Oh no! so
the missiles like all just they veer off and miss.
You don't see that in the animes, do you?
No. And then like one of the other like NPCs swooped in, destroyed it, and saved the day. But the point was that it was just like the moment, like the plot moment of glory. And it was like a natural fun.
Oh man! Oh, that's awful. That is awful.
So that was an epic fail.
That is a good epic fail right there. All right. So next question, and then we're gonna lightning round these last ones. All right. So what's the highest level you've ever played a character to?
12 in 2nd edition, 11 in 5e.
Okay. What's your favorite magical item?
Ooh, that's a tough one. My top pick is the Talisman of the Sphere, just because I find it hilarious to move a Sphere of Annihilation onto someone. But my number 2 is Dust of Dryness.
Oh, nice. Why Dust of Dryness? Because I like that
because
too.
You could suck up a small lake and then like drop it on someone.
Yeah, exactly. All right. If you had an in real life alignment, what would it be?
Neutral, like the most of humanity.
Okay, good. If you had to date one of your characters, which one would you pick?
I think I would pick Ariana, because even if she's a bit racist, she's a lot of fun. Whereas Roxanne is sort of a stick in the mud because she's a paladin. So.
Paladin, yeah, I see that. Is there a character you want to play but haven't had a chance to play yet?
Yeah, I would say the Way of Mercy monk looks pretty interesting. I like the idea of a monk that like hits people, makes them explode, and then hits people and heals them. Kind of Kenshiro going. But if I had to pick a number 2, it would be a barbarian wrestler type.
There you go.
WWF, here we go.
There you go. All right. Are you a dice goblin or a dice minimalist?
More of a minimalist. I mean, I do get occasionally, but I don't like see something and say, all right, I got to get this, and So.
There we go. A fellow dice minimalist. I like it. All right. Last question. What rule or mechanic have you never quite wrapped your brain around? Now, I'm curious about this because you probably have the best understanding of the rules.
Yeah, there's 2 mechanics that piss me off, that have always pissed me off. One is falling. Falling makes no sense.
Yes.
It's like, I just fell. I mean, and people have joked about this for years. You fall like 100 feet. Well, you take the same damage, you fall from orbit. It's like,
exactly.
It's like Samurai Jack when he falls from orbit and just like gets up and walks up. It's like, like, especially if you're high enough level, you can do that. So the falling is ridiculous. The other one, and I don't know how 5e does it, but it was always an issue in previous editions, is crafting. Like if you want to craft, it's based on the value of the item. So, okay, crafting a silver ring takes 1/10 the time. If I want to craft a ring out of gold, it takes 10 times longer. And if I craft the same ring and want to put a gemstone in it, it's going to take me 100 years.
Yeah.
It makes 0 sense. And so I felt that those 2 rule mechanics are just no one spent any time thinking about them whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree. Well, good job, man. That was the DnDTag. It was really cool kind of getting to know your background because we hadn't really talked about a lot of this stuff before. So well done on the DnDTag, Matt. And we're going to get into our last post of the week here. It comes from Reddit user Paspalon, who says, am I the only one who ends up using 3.5 lore for fleshing out campaigns in 5e? Where's the love for depth at the moment? Honestly, if I'm not building an OG canon, many of the current adventures feel like they were written with the expectation of DMs largely winging it, which I'm certainly cool with in general, but I certainly expect to be retconning any of those creative band-aids I slap on what I can only describe as marketing decisions more than anything. Thoughts? Now, Matt, we ran into this last night when Steve was talking about, how the players are supposed to get to the kind of next level, and the module doesn't actually say, hey, these are the options, or this is how they do it. They just assume you get there somehow. So what are your thoughts on bringing in previous edition lore or even, depth in terms of mechanics or writings into a 5e campaign?
Yeah, so I think this has been a problem with 5e. I think they've kind of, they've turned a lot of the adventures into, A pointer to B, pointer to C. And, I've heard that from both, Steve and Tom, and I haven't run a 5e adventure, but apparently, and previous adventures, like the Wrath of the Immortals campaign, so they flesh out like all this stuff in this old campaign box. Mm-hmm. So I think the questioner, Parspalon is absolutely right. I think it's a great idea to bring in whatever lore you have from previous editions into the game, with the caveat that occasionally when they come out with a new edition, they've changed or progressed the history of the world in some way to fit like the new rules mechanics. Yeah. So it's like suddenly like, oh, where did all these Goliaths come from? They're not in any of the previous history. It's like, oh, they just like popped up, or something changed. Like Forgotten Realms has all kinds of weird shit happening, the gods come, are stripped of their power, or there's a spell blight or something, and then there's like mechanics related to that, or it was, so you can bring so you have to be a little careful sometimes if there were rules that sort of changed the way the world worked, and there was history that changed how the world worked. But aside from those things, I think it's bring in whatever you can, because it is a creative endeavor, and even though they should provide a bit more background in the box sets and the campaign settings, it's never a replacement for good DMing and good writing. So
and honestly, depending on your group, if you got people who don't have that background or are fairly newer players, it really doesn't matter what you bring in, because they're not going to know. Hell, like I'm pretty new, and whenever I did that pirate campaign, I was just like on Wiki looking up like the past history of the cities that we were in. Was that one up there? Luskan. And cool history. And
I knew a little bit about Luskan just from Great Gateway to the Savage Frontier.
Yes.
Because that was one of the places you go. So like the host tower figured pretty strongly into that. But unless the players know that, right? You can do, and we didn't do anything with the host tower at all.
No, well, and actually, history wise, it was destroyed and then started to be rebuilt. Yeah, I guess in Spelljammer, I guess it was the 4th edition. It ended up getting
4th edition,
destroyed. Like most things, and now it's kind of rebuilt, but they're not they're not as involved in the politics anymore like they used to be. Like it used to be like they controlled shit.
Oh yeah, they were like big villains.
Exactly. And I was really disappointed. I actually flirted with the idea of going pre-Spell Plague, just because I'd rather have them, really kind of in things, but regardless, that was a short adventure, so no need to do
but
that.
That's an example of a case where the history's progressed, and it sort of can mess with things, and so that.
And honestly, if you want to go back to 3.5, you don't have to do a current campaign. You can set it whenever you want. Like you said, though, it might mess with some mechanics that 5e put forth.
Well, presumably, like if a new race is introduced, presumably the new race is
just retcon them in. They've always been here, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think both of us are in agreement that bring it in. Why not? What's it hurt? So good luck out there, Paspalon. Let us know how your campaign is going. But that is going to do it for us this week. Remember, if you want to send in your questions or anything you find on the internet, you can send them to questions@PotomacRPG.com. Check out our store for merch at store.PotomacRPG.com. And lastly, you can follow us at Potomac RPG on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for being on today, Matt. Really cool talking to you. Thank you to the rest of the Potomac RPG crew, and of course, all of our wonderful listeners out there. So for the Potomac RPG Podcast, I'm Adam.
I'm Matt.
Until next time, keep those dice rolling, keep those stories coming, and
never stop playing.
Just go
Is it arch or arc?
I always say arc, but I don't
Arc.
know.
Arc
I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, let's review that.